Hello and welcome to Your Employment Matters. I'm Beverly Williams and I'm here to help you navigate your career. This is for anyone who's searching for their dream job or promotion, or perhaps you're just looking to hang on to the job you have. Today's work environments are multi-generational, multi-religious, multinational, multiracial, and multi-gender identity. Add market disruptors like Amazon and Lyft, along with the addition of AI, and it's easy to see why finding and keeping a job is such a challenge. Employment success and even employment survival depend on your ability to adapt. That's why my goal for this 30-minute podcast is to first advocate embracing change and differences, and second, to encourage you to proactively assume responsibility for your career. Get your work week off to a good start by listening to Your Employment Matters every Monday. Find out how to own your career and get the best practices for making your employment matter. My guest today is Stephen Kurkjian, an award-winning American journalist and author. Steve has received the Pulitzer Prize on 3 separate occasions. That's amazing. Some journalists never even receive one. Steve received his awards as a member of the Boston Globe's Spotlight team, which he helped establish in 1971, and is now the oldest investigative reporting team in the United States. Steve is a graduate of Boston University. He attended Suffolk University School of Law part-time while holding down a full-time job as a reporter. In addition to his work on the Spotlight team, Steve was chief of the Globe's Washington Bureau, where he covered both the Reagan and Bush administrations. Since retiring from the Globe, Steve has authored Master Thieves, which is a nonprofit book chronicling the historic and still unsolved art theft on Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. We'll talk about the book during Steve's conversation or his interview, because I'm interested in hearing more about that. I'm always interested in unsolved situations. I guess you could call me nosy. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for persevering with me through our technical difficulties. We resolved them, and I'm so happy to see your wonderful face.
Thank you, Beverly. In your wonderful introduction, I just would ask to change one word, and you called it a nonprofit book. It's a nonfiction book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Okay, let me go back and correct that. Excuse my speaking. It's not a nonprofit book. It is a nonfiction. I apologize. And I purposely read your bio so I wouldn't make mistakes.
You're great. Well, thank you for having me.
You've had such an interesting employment journey. You seem to be such a Renaissance man. And for our listeners' benefit, I just want to let them know how we connected. I'm in this group of authors, and I'm always looking for guests that have interesting employment journeys and interesting stories to tell about their lives and what they've been through as they move through life and living. And one of the participants said, you need to talk to Steve Kurkjian. He was this, he was that, he was this, he was that. And I thought, I know, I recognize that name. It's an unusual name. And it turns out that because I watched ESPN and FS1 all day long, I had heard the last name, and the last name is the same as Tim Kurkjian, who works for ESPN. Your cousin, I found out.
He is. He's my second cousin. I have not been in his company enough during my long life. He grew up in D.C., although his family came from Watertown, Massachusetts, which my father, too, once he emigrated, came to the United States as a 10-year-old in the early 20s. He lived right near Tim's father. And through the years, Tim, when the father moved to D.C., Tim went into journalism, which I had already entered into here in the Globe. And even when I was down in Washington, I don't think I was in Tim's company more than 3 or 4 times. But over the years now, since I retired and got home and got to appreciate his work so immensely, he's an extraordinary resource when it comes to baseball. He doesn't just know the stats, and he doesn't just know the players. He knows the idiosyncrasies and the triumphs and the sadnesses of so many players. And his telling of those stories is an incredible resource. And to share his last name, it's really warming because I brought my family closer to his family. 2 years ago, Tim was, for players, it's called inducted. For writers, it's called ascension. He ascended to the National Baseball, Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. And damn, I was going to let that happen without being there. And about my daughter and my grandson.
I can tell from the way the analysts speak to him and refer to him and rely on him, call him in for interviews and to share information with viewers, that he's highly regarded and very respected.
One more thing about Tim. He and his son, Jeff, who's named after Tim's father, Jeff's grandfather, have started a podcast. It's called Isn't This the Greatest Game? Or some derivation of it. And every Tuesday they drop their next episode, and it's always about the minutiae of baseball. Well, only those of us, and I call you us in that, Bev, would, drop media, say, oh, it's Tuesday, great, I can listen to Tim and Jeff. Well, I was on the road the other day, and I hadn't listened. I was on the road going to my grandson's baseball game about 150 miles away and driving through a rainstorm, and I'm listening to their latest episode. And damn, 3 days before, I had sent a note to Tim. And I said, Tim, a message. Tim, I'm going to Fenway Park tonight with a bunch of guys. And is there any chance you're going to be there? Because then I would introduce them, my friends, to Tim. And Tim says, no, Steve. But then Tim uses in his podcast, my cousin Steve, who was first time visited Fenway Park as a 5-year-old. 1948, my aunt, beloved aunt, dedicated my book to her, Master Thieves, to her. She brought me to Fenway Park. Why in 1948? Because, Stephen, you may never get to see Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio on the same field. And so it's just a wonderful, important thing. And as Tim said in his podcast, here he is all these years later. 2 years ago, he brought his grandson to the Little League World Series, which Tim does broadcast for ESPN on. And the best thing about it, stayed for 10 days. Best thing about it is I got to introduce my grandson to Tim Kurkjian.
It's great. He's definitely a gem.
Yeah.
As far as baseball is concerned. Tell us about yourself. What made you decide to embark on journalism?
Thank you. I didn't really decide. I loved literature. I loved to read. And I can remember taking out biographies from my local library in Dorchester, Massachusetts, just to read about people's lives and their triumphs and some of their tragedies. And I studied hard. I went to Boston's, what's regarded as Boston, in fact, the States, and at some points, the United States' best high school, and at the 7th grade to the 12th. Well, and I kept reading and did that in college and all. And I just loved telling stories, and I presumed that I could write. But the real sine qua non was that my mother had gone back to work in the 50s after having 3 kids, my sisters, 2 sisters and I. She got a job at the Boston Herald Traveler, which is a competitor to the Boston Globe. And she said to me, well, as I was in college, you might have journalism in your genes. Why don't you get a job in a college newspaper? Which I did and loved it. What really engaged me was the interaction you had with people who were, for that moment in time, at the pinnacle of their career or their lives. And you got, because you're a journalist, because of the First Amendment and the freedom of the press, it is such an honored and responsible position. And you got to shake hands with the guy. And my first job was up at the State House, Massachusetts State House, and I worked there and I got to write up on the events going on at the State House. And 2 years later, my mother said to me, you're not really going to make enough money to raise a family as a journalist, so maybe you ought to really get a good career under your belt. So I said, well, I'll go to law school. So I went to law school nights while I was working at the State House. And the Globe, when I got the job in 1968, working for it, the light that I had was getting a legal background. And so I continued with that. I wasn't married then, and I just spent all my time running around, hustling, getting stories, working hard. At that point in time, the Vietnam War was was the issue of the day, and I was covering the Vietnam War protests. But I was getting that legal background, which the Globe, I guess I felt it was a good resource for it as well as myself. And I got, in the summer of 1969, I covered what I regarded two of the biggest of the three stories that summer. The one I didn't cover was the landing on the moon, but the other two was Senator Kennedy's accident, Ted Kennedy's accident on an island off of the coast of Massachusetts, Chappaquiddick. And I was only like 20 miles away, and the Globe editor of the weekend called me, sent me down there. I did well, and the next month I had a week off, and I happened to see there was a rock and roll concert up in upstate New York. And I said, well, I love rock and roll, and I still do. So I sauntered up there, and when I saw that this festival of 80,000 had turned into an event for 500,000, I got to a phone and called in, and so I covered those for 4 or 5 days. So as I was driving back, I can remember it still, in my beat-up Saab, two-cylinder Saab, and I'm pretty much going into my last year of law school, and I said to myself, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay a reporter or become a lawyer? And I said, I'm never going to have as much fun or be so close to major news events as I am as a reporter, as I am having as a reporter. I'll stick with it. So I passed the bar, but never looked back. Stayed reporting in the Globe. Soon after, because of the recommendation of a terrific editor, Tim Leland, I joined the Spotlight team and was called a founding member. And it was terrific for so many ways, because the first researcher that was hired by the team was a young woman from Schenectady, New York. And we began a relationship that resulted in marriage and 2 children and 3 grandchildren. It's been
That's great.
The marriage didn't last as long as the happiness did, but it was terrific. So I just have had such a rewarding, I guess, very rewarding. I wouldn't say more than happy, because it's a struggle. It's hard to get stories, hard to be an investigative reporter. But being an investigative reporter in the town you grew up in is an added advantage. In fact, it's probably the only advantage, because people know you from your high school. People know you from your church. People know you from your parents and your grandparents. And okay, we'll talk to you. I know your cousin. And you get brought in, but you have to do it the right way.
But journalism is something I think you have to be hardwired for, because you mentioned the First Amendment. There are constitutional implications.
Absolutely.
Journalists I've always considered them to be people of integrity.
Absolutely.
At least that's the way it's supposed to be, that you could rely on what you read. I mean, even if you didn't read it, if you saw it on television, Walter Cronkite, and maybe listeners are not familiar with that name, But if he said it, everyone believed it.
Exactly.
He was the gold standard. Edward R. Murrow, the gold standard. So, to your point, journalists are critical. Journalists of integrity, journalists who are willing to put in the time and effort to get to the truth. And there may be different interpretations of what the truth means, but fact is what it is. It's unsaleable, insaleable. You can't manipulate it into something else and still have a fact. It's pristine almost.
The fuddling is, and I'm not blaming the journalists, I'm blaming the media, the splintering of the media. We are all, whether we work or we've grown up and become reporters at the Post, the Times, CNN, Fox News, those reporters with the microphone in front of their faces are all brought up with the same principles and the same standards. But what the editors and what the owners of the media has splintered so much that you can get accounts that reporters have to put food on the table just like all of us. And if you are lucky enough to get hired by Fox, you haven't forgot your First Amendment responsibilities, because that is absolute. If you're going to go in and put on a mic and cover the news, those First Amendment responsibilities are still as important and integral in what you cover and how you cover it as it was when Dan Rather and Charles Kuralt and Edward R. Murrow in the early 60s were doing for their CBS and Walter Cronkite. But there is a demand. And I don't question the journalists.
I question the journalists because I question the industry. It's
I
not
hear you. I hear you.
The industry. Technology has decimated the industry.
Right. That's the splintering.
And it's newsprint's gone, almost completely disappeared. Even the magazines, Newsweek, Time, it's not the same. They're gone.
Right. Exactly.
To some degree, they're diminished, severely diminished. I've heard loved ones say, "Oh, well, that's not true." I said, "What do you mean it's not true?" I said, "Oh, no, I did my research." "Where did you research?"
Yeah.
Facebook.
Another person's opinion. Exactly.
Facebook.
Let me try this for an answer for you for this issue. Judgment. Judgment is the final determination. We're not there yet. We're still rolling around in the tidal wave, back and forth. It's done a lot of churning. But I'm not ready to judge how American journalism is doing, is faring, as to what we're seeing on the various news channels now.
Well, let me say this. I'm afraid. I am really afraid because I know young people, my godchildren,
right,
don't believe, and I guess they shouldn't believe, but they don't believe what they see on reliable, what I consider reliable media platforms. I mean, if you make a mistake, we all make a mistake. If you get something wrong and you come back and you correct it, that's human. But if you purposely say something that has no basis in fact and you don't correct it, that is dangerous.
But the splintering has caused the younger people, including, let's say, your godchildren, to get their news from different places that are not, I would say, fueled by the First Amendment. They're fueled by the need for entertainment.
No, it's true. And people are influenced by people they're familiar with, that they see in media.
And what do they go for? They go for from Twitter, TikTok,
Instagram?
Instagram. Okay. Now, I went to I live outside of Boston now, and during the pandemic, just got just more isolated. So I called a friend who is in charge of the hiring at Boston University, my alma mater, which I had taught as an adjunct professor. And I said, hey, why don't you bring me back? I'll teach that course on media law and ethics. And he said, okay, come in January. I did. So I taught from January until May. It was the biggest thing I changed that I had made in 4 or 5 years. And I went in and lectured to juniors and seniors at Boston University in the journalism program. And I saw where they were getting their news. Regardless of what the professors were insisting on, they were still going to Instagram and whatever to get their accounts. Well, not in my classroom are you going to do that. Everybody has to shut down their machines and let's have a conversation about the First Amendment. And later in the semester, I handed out longer assignments. And one of the assignments I gave to one of the kids, she did it with 2 or 3 others, had to do with the, let's say, Fair Play Amendment that was in place by the federal government in granting licenses for radio and TV. That you had to, and I'm not getting the terminology, I'm not getting the name of it right, but back in the day, this was taken away later in the 80s under President Reagan. But back in the day, there was a clause in the licensing for all media outlets that said you had to cover your community. You don't have to just go to the most, if it bleeds, it leads. You had to be able make sure that you are covering your ethnic community. Make sure you're covering your school board and your planning board and your selectmen. You have to be out there making sure, and that's how we will, one of the factors that we will judge on relicensing you for, what was it then, 5 or 10 years. And so as a result, there was much more openness to the media. They were out there not just covering the tragedies or the awfulness of what goes on in the city, or one candidate saying awful things about the other candidate. They were out there covering the citizens, the public residents, the well-to-do, the people who were selling Cadillacs and the high rises, but also the people who were not doing so well in living in that same community. And that coverage, therefore, gave us, the public, awareness of what was going on in our cities. And because we're Americans, we care what the heck is going on with those people who are not as fortunate as us. And it had a really sort of educational and informed effect on the communities. So you just didn't have radio stations that were spewing whatever, right wing or left wing, let's say right wing, because that's what most of them do now, right wing invective. You had them covering their community. And the young woman whom I gave, she was Greek. And she got a couple of other students, and they did such a terrific job in covering that. But she came to me after the class was over, and she said, I had no idea you had this requirement, mandate. And I said, that's the problem, that we allow these important pieces of the structure we're building. And this structure is out of the First Amendment. And you're trying to inform people with debate, openness, back and forth. When they took that out, that openness in covering the community, we got to judgment. And a lot of invective, a lot of narrowness, a lot of obscenity was able to sneak into our conversation and our attitudes towards one another. I have the most fun with my conservative cops or correction officers that I sit down to lunch with. We poke each other unbearably. The people behind us might say, oh boy, this is going to, but we're just challenging each other. What's going on? What's going on? But we do it
But that's the way it used to be.
Exactly. Or now we can't talk about it.
No. No.
But
But
you
see, you
that's
touched on
we
something.
gotta keep talking, because when we keep talking, inevitably, your grandson who's playing baseball will come up. Oh, I got a niece who plays for the same team in the softball team. I'll ask him if he knows her. What's her name again? That's how we bond. We bond through things that are
But
similar in our people's
Steve,
lives.
today's workplaces have, call it, 5 different demographics working together.
Good for you.
And I fervently hope that all 5, the people, the employees in all 5 demographics
Yeah, good for you.
recognize the opportunity to work together to further the employer's purpose, but to broaden their knowledge base.
Remarkable. That is a tradition. Those workplaces are part of the American institution. If you can get communication going on there, whether it's at lunchtime or after hours, in which we're talking up in the newsroom, we're talking to the people who are driving the trucks, who are composing, who are working in the composition rooms, the blue collar workers, that they know that we don't have our head in the clouds. The only reason we're lucky enough to work for that paper is that we can get people to talk to us. And that's the important thing, is to keep talking.
Let me say this to you. I've done a series of podcast interviews on labor management relations because unionism seems to be enjoying a resurgence. Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe there's something will come of it, maybe it won't. But I think people needed information from all sides, from union lawyers, union leaders, management types, and neutrals. What do you think about me doing a series of podcasts about journalism, the fourth estate?
I think we've gone by the calmer waters. And as a result, that the waters are so turbulent that people will not be, I'm out now, I'm retired. So I would be worried if what I said would be considered too provocative. I mean, the Globe is even more progressive than I am, and I consider myself a Boston boy. But my only concern would be, would the institutions allow their rank and file, whether they work in the composing room or work in front office?
Well, maybe the way to approach it is to get retired journalists.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the other day a video that Dan Rather, a documentary on Dan Rather, has put out. And Dan himself said that he's less liberal now than he had been, but still is interested in getting the story. Terrific stories.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility. One of my previous guests was I think he's still the dean of journalism at Temple University in Philadelphia. We have a mutual friend who made the connection for me. And his interview was similar to the discussion you and I are having.
I'm rethinking what I said about Dan. I think Dan's remark that he's gotten more progressive, not less, more progressive, because he continues to do the work that we are involved in as journalists.
Yeah.
I still work on a couple of major stories that I care about, including the Gardner Museum case. But I don't think there's anything. Free speech is free speech. You could talk to anybody. Just put your hand out there. Hi, I'm Steve Kurkjian from the Boston Globe. I always thought that is the most powerful sentence in the English language. Starts with those words. I'm Steve Kurkjian from the Boston Globe, and I would like to know ... Because
Right.
of the First Amendment.
Well, I would appreciate it if you would think about it and tell me whether you think it's something that I should pursue.
I do think journalists you're right when you say they have an honored place they have always had an honored place, let me say. Whether they're having it today or tomorrow is another question.
That's
Particularly,
it.
particularly when
When I hear people say, I did my research, I said, oh, okay. And I know what their background is. And I know that their background is not such that they have research skills, because it's more than just going
right,
to social media
I hear you.
and culling information from social media. You need to go deep. You need to use reliable sources,
Right.
and you don't need to take anyone or anything at face value. You need to verify by checking out multiple sources. You need to get it from multiple reliable sources.
And that involves Beverly picking up the phone. It's not just reading it from a website or a media outlet that is saying and reporting things that you like to hear. It's talking to a whole circle of media and getting their sides of the story.
Let's go back to the other point you made about local news. Local newspaper people don't make a lot of money. But
That's
if
what,
they start in junior high school and they work, they might create a paper for a newsletter or newspaper for their school. And then when they go to high school, they do the same thing. Then
it's,
at least you got a funnel. You've got
yeah. Well, that's that. And let me tell you, journalism schools are still teaching the
they are,
same
yes.
skills. Whether it's at Temple, at Boston University, or Northeastern in Boston, the skills are the same in verifying, not needing documentation, making sure you confront the individual whom you are writing about with some critical or judgmental information. That's the hallmark of journalism, because in the end, you've got a person's reputation in your hand.
Well, you've got a person's reputation, but you also have a professional and a personal obligation to yourself
Exactly.
to be the best journalist you can be.
Yeah, right.
There goes the integrity piece of it again.
Exactly. It's absolutely demanded. To think that you'd be able to write a story that was judgmental, positive or negative, about an individual who had been involved in what you would consider a major news event without addressing that person. One of my heroes when I started at the Globe said he spent more time trying to track down a person to get their response to what he had learned than he had gotten it, because people are willing to whisper in your ear.
Yeah.
They can get away with something
because social media, they could be decimated.
Exactly.
They could be threatened, but their livelihood could be severely diminished and compromised.
Don't forget what our grandparents told us. Lose your hand before you lose your name.
It's important.
Absolutely. Your reputation you may be pretty, but your reputation is more important than anything else.
Well, if you would think about what we've discussed, and I'm going to go back to the journalist I interviewed previously and see what he thinks.
And we'll do a 3-way conversation. Let's play with that.
I want to see, and I think it's a good idea to start young with the kids doing their reporting.
Absolutely.
Because these kids are like pit bulls. You know what I mean? If they don't you say you don't want to talk to them, they're dogged. They're dogged. If they think that you should be giving them an answer, they will pursue it.
Exactly.
There needs to be a funnel of journalists coming up through the ranks.
Good for you.
So that by the time they get to college, they're more seasoned than what they would otherwise be.
They're knowing how to craft a lead.
Exactly. But I will be in touch. I'm going to let you go now because we're about finished. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, if I could talk just a moment about the Gardner Museum case.
Sure.
Because I consider that to be the best untapped, even though you saw that great documentary that Netflix put out, 4-part series that's titled This is a Robbery. The loss is still there. I had 3 documentaries that I participated in with just in the last year. 2 on the History Channel and 1 on CNN, and all about the same thing. How did this happen? This theft of 13 pieces of art, including 4 masterpieces, in 1990, and why, even though the FBI says that whoever did it is dead, they didn't name them, is dead, the paintings, the artwork remains missing. And I'm telling you, it is artwork of the ages. We're talking 2 large Rembrandts, alone worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
They're hanging in somebody's private
somewhere.
collection.
I think they're stashed away. For the reporting that I did, the individual stole them not to fence the artwork and get millions for them. He did it to get another bad guy, the head of his mob, out of jail. But the head of his mob said to him after he stole them, "Don't include me in, you're a fruitcake. Don't include me in what you've done here, because you don't know what you're doing." And so he backed away. So the intent of why they were stolen, which is to get this artful organized crime figure out of jail, that was lost. That was gone. And this fruitcake, that's the wrong thing. I shouldn't be dismissive of him, derogatory towards him. But this lesser guy, he had nowhere to go with him, and he engaged the wrong people on trying to sell them, and he was murdered, brutally murdered. But before he was murdered, I think he hid somewhere, and they have been missing for 34 years now, 1990. And the more important thing about their being missing is my idea on how to get them back. And that is to go back to the reason that they were hanging in this Gardner Museum in Boston. Mrs. Gardner was a well-born Brahmin, came to Boston, married one of our most well-to-do entrepreneurs, and they lost their son, had a son, he died, and she started traveling with her husband, and they went the world over collecting art. And she realized, this is in the 19th century, and she realized that art had an energizing, had an elevating, a transcendent factor to it. When you appreciated art, you became greater than the sum of your parts. Art transcends it all. And she wanted to bring that factor to Boston. She and her husband lived in Boston. And so she said, let's start a museum. And the museum she opened was free of charge. And they put together a program that had all 8th graders coming to the museum 1 day a year. Why? Because she wanted to instill in our kids both the well-to-do and the less well-to-do, the haves and the have-nots, a sense of the beauty of art. I know this story. My father was one of those immigrants. He was a boy of the streets, and they saw in high school that he could draw. They sent him to art school, and he would go to the museum every day after school to study the art, and it was free. And he became a terrific artist. He raised our family through his artistry. But Boston has changed since those days. Boston has become a more welcoming, more universal, more diverse city. And I want someone like the Pope to reach out on behalf of these missing paintings and say to the public, Boston has had a transformation. It is no longer the omerta, the snitches get stitches. Boston is a universal city now. And it's time for that city to look up in their attic, look in their house that their great-grandfather lived in, and see if that art might be there. Because somebody knows something. They're not talking, because in some neighborhoods and some families, still, that credo of you don't talk, you don't say anything.
No.
But they have to be convinced that Boston has changed. And I think having someone like the Pope, or if not the Pope, the Cardinal. One of the paintings was something called Storm on the Sea of Galilee. It's a Rembrandt, majestic large 6-foot painting
Wow.
showing Christ in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. If the city can change so dramatically as it has, we recovered. We lost 5 people in that tragic bombing at our Boston Marathon. In Boston, but many lives were saved. Amputees who would have, under normal circumstances, would have had a much more tragic end. Their lives were saved. And I think that Boston will get another recovery if we find our paintings. The majesty, it's more than $1 billion worth of artwork is stolen, and the world should be paying attention to it. Should be
Let me
calling
say
on.
this to you.
Yeah.
Robert Kraft. No, seriously. He did the country a solid during COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now, you may want to reach out. If you know anyone that can reach out to him and get his,
That's a great idea, Beverly, and I will take advantage of it.
I think he would be helpful. He would know the Catholics that are influential.
Yeah. You're right in knowing he's a man of wants to solve problems and make people well again.
Yes.
And so it's good for you. Beverly, I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Steve, I will be in touch, and thank you so much. I enjoyed it. I knew I would. Thanks for listening to Your Employment Matters with Beverly Williams. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. I truly appreciate your support, and that helps other listeners find the podcast. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion, you can reach me at baWilliams@youremploymentmatters.com. My book, Get the Job Done, is available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Please join me again next week. Until then, remember to embrace change and differences.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.